So when Glenda first asked me to do the presentation, I was like, let me Google Asian women and the internet. Oops. And it was so it was so interesting. It didn't even occur to me because I was like, oh, maybe I'll get some like really cool studies. Maybe if I look at Google Scholar, literally just pages and pages and pages of Asian dating online, Asian porn, the biggest thing was mail order brides, Asian mail order brides, and so there was this kind of like overabundance of resources to kind of date, own, and sexualize Asian women online. And then comparatively, I did just like a quick Google search of like women online. And women online, it was like the first 6 were kind of like statistics on women online, and then like the 6th one was dating. So we're all objectified, just in different degrees. So I started thinking about everything from my dad putting up a profile on sadhi.com to get me married, to Sepia Mutiny and all the amazing Chinese sex bloggers, and then even kind of like the radical Afghanistani revolutionary women who are blogging right now, and kind of all these really interesting and different ways that Asian communities all around the world are interacting with online spaces. What I found, and as someone who's kind of works in gender and writes and talks about gender, I found this kind of tension that I noticed, and it was either this moment of exploitation for Asian women online as an experience, or there was this potential, like liberatory potential for using these tools to kind of disseminate a new and unique identity that was something that they felt they had full control over. One example that I felt really captured this contradiction of, or this moment that online spaces were kind of surpassing cultural norms was a couple of years ago. I was in India, and there was this big story that came out about a young girl whose boyfriend had videotaped her giving him a blowjob, and he had spread it virally on the internet. And he tried to sell it on Bazi.com, which is the Indian subsidiary of eBay. What ended up happening is they actually arrested Avnish Bajaj, who's the CEO of Baji.com, because the cops absolutely did not know what to do, because this video went viral overnight, and the young woman basically disappeared, and her family was they claimed that she was coerced into the act, and she left the country, and nobody has heard of her. I've actually tried to dig up stories about her, and we don't really know what happened. And I feel like this kind of captures that moment that Indian technology, access to technology, has kind of surpassed what society is actually ready to accept in terms of sexuality for young women. Who's to say that she was coerced or she wasn't coerced? But if she was not coerced, there's really no narrative in current kind of contemporary Indian culture to really give voice to that story. So I felt like that was one really interesting example. Another one, the last time I was in India, is I noticed all the cyber cafes had private booths. So people could come in and use the internet cafes and relieve themselves as they needed because they had access to pornography. It was one of the only spaces they could kind of have access to pornography. And it was super sleazy. I mean, whatever, I was like, I'm not gonna use these internet cafes. But it was just this really unique moment that, and it was kind of people didn't know it was happening. So folks would just people's husbands, their sons were going to these internet cafes, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They're like, oh, they're just going to access the internet, and didn't know there was this kind of whole underground market of internet porn that was happening and whatever. So, we're looking at there's potential to create this imagined self or even your realized self and explore your own sexuality, but then there's also this violence that comes with it, which is either in the form of objectification or the fact that the kind of country or the culture that you're living in isn't really ready to accept the way that the norms are being pushed. What is the value of these alternate spaces, and how do we move to a place where we can look at the way that Asian communities are interacting online, and how can we kind of change representation, first of all, and then second of all, also recognize these as really unique spaces, but also spaces that need shifting and they need changing and they need support. So I recommend for folks to look at a lot of the sex bloggers in China that are doing really amazing cutting edge work, and then some of the really active online communities, within kind of the social networking sites that are really specific to different countries. Orkut is really big in India. I don't use Orkut here, but I have a profile just because every one of my Indian family members is on it. And the conversation that's happening there is really different than the conversation that's happening on Facebook. And it's still really unique and rich. And so that's kind of what I feel is in terms of trends for localized online community-based kind of sharing and whatnot. And then I think in the US context, it's really interesting that there are a lot of really vocal Asian American bloggers, and they're highly politicized and they're online. And I think that that also shows this trend in US Asian American culture where there's an inability to kind of express yourself within your racial and ethnic group, maybe like in your family or within your own community. And so people are really going online to access, these more kind of like radical politics and to express themselves in these new and unique ways.